I wanted to talk about innovation in terms of thinking about events, thinking about things that you can do. And actually, I think the message that I wanted to give to people is to be brave enough to not always tread the normal path. So I'm going to talk today very briefly about Mike Hall and something called the Transcontinental. This chap here is Mike Hall. He talked about an inspiration of the Tour de France of yesteryear. We've got a photo here of the Tour de France when it was first starting to make headlines around the world. It was a journey across France, and it was very much an element of self-sufficiency and of adventure. And you may have seen clips of people stopping by a boulangerie, running in, grabbing bread rolls and getting back on their bikes again, or even, in the most extreme cases, of stopping at a blacksmith's and having to repair their own bikes. When Mike Hall got into cycling, and then when he was watching it in the early 2000s, the Tour de France was a very different thing indeed. The chap on the left is Lance Armstrong, who won a lot of Tour de France, but then it was found out that he wasn't actually quite all that he was cracked up to be. And I think what Mike Hall felt was a worry that we'd travelled away from those initial goals and that it was becoming something very different. And he wanted to look for something, he wasn't getting out of that what he wanted from the sport. So he looked for a different type of cycling. And he was doing what's now called long-distance ultra racing. He did a couple of events called the Tour Divide and also the Transamerica bike race. This is the Tour Divide, which goes from Banff in Canada all the way down the Great Continental Divide to the Mexican border. As you can see, 4,500 kilometres. And he's still currently the record holder for that route, which is done on mountain bikes, and he did it in just under 2 weeks, and that happens every year. The Transamerica bike race goes the other way, if you like. You might have heard of the Race Across America, but the way that Mike Hall does his events is that you have to be totally self-sufficient. And you'll notice that all of these bikes that you're seeing photos of carry bags and have equipment with them. That means that people need to do everything themselves. They need to choose where they're going to sleep, they need to choose what they're going to eat, and they need to completely provide for themselves. The idea to kind of go back to how things used to be in the good old days. So he founded what's called the Transcontinental. He took those ideas that he'd seen in America and he brought them over to Europe with a little bit of a twist. All of the events that he'd done in America had what are called fixed route events, but he wanted to combine those long-distance fixed route events with elements of orienteering. So rather than telling people which way they had to go, just give them a number of checkpoints that they had to visit on their journey across Europe. And so there's a little bit of blurb there talking about what his fundamental vision was in terms of creating this dream, his innovation, if you like. It's a single-stage race in which the clock never stops, and it's 4,000 kilometres across Europe. I'll let you just read that. So in 2013, he organised the first Transcontinental race, and that was a group of about 60 people who gathered together in London, and they only had 2 checkpoints that they had to visit on their way to Istanbul. They firstly needed to go to Gerardsbergen in Belgium, which is a very famous place in Flanders with a lot of cycling history, and then also visit the Stelvio Pass in northern Italy before going on to Istanbul. And it was won by this chap here, Christophe Allegaert, who's a teacher from Belgium, who had no idea that this was the kind of thing that he was going to be good at. Turns out he's absolutely fantastic at it. And you can talk to him, you can listen to him and decide which of those attributes of his makes him good at this particular type of racing. But it took him just 7 days and 13 hours to cycle from London to Istanbul. I think people were attracted by the kind of back to basics element. And the success of the Transcontinental grew and grew. And within 2 years, they were taking 4 or 5 times as many applications as they were offering places on the race. 1 year later, they added another couple of checkpoints, this time via Paris and also somewhere in Montenegro, and they started to take the route, which was primarily designed for road bikes, slightly off course, as you can see there. This is going across the high mountains of Montenegro. But again, Christophe Allegaert came back from Belgium and won it again for a second year. Carrying on from there, you can see now they established format the next 3 years, and that popularity had been founded. So Michael had found his niche. He was now I think most people would argue, the organiser of the world's premier bike packing race. Now, I think there was a feeling he'd come from a position of being the best, and he'd now created, especially this chap, Christophe Alligaert, he felt that he was the best as well. And there was a moment then in 2017 where both of them entered a new race, which was called the Indian Pacific Wheel Race in Australia. I'll come back to that in a second, but firstly I just wanted to show you, and I hope this will work, a short clip from the start of the Transcontinental race. The Transcontinental race chose its position for beginning now in Gerardsbergen in Belgium. They start at 10 p.m. at night. So, Michael was dedicated to simplicity. He wanted to design a race where you could put the whole rules of the race just on one piece of paper, which is what he did here. Then he went with Christophe Alligaert to Australia. There's the two of them, Michael on the left, Alligaert on the right. And they competed in the Indian Pacific Wheel Race. It was a really interesting race to watch, and what it summed up is why this kind of racing is perfect for a modern generation, because plenty of people can watch these races from the content of their own, from the safety of their own home. Every rider has a tracker on their bike, and you can load up a map and you can watch where the riders are. And essentially, thousands and thousands of people were watching Michael and Alligaert racing across Australia. The problem was, Alligaert was faster. Michael was in front, and every day Alligaert was catching him. And the only thing that Michael could do was choose to have less and less sleep every day. But Australia is a very, very big place. And as he was closing in on him, there were 500 kilometres to go until they got to Sydney. So they've got all the way over here. They've already gone through Melbourne, and they're cutting their way up towards Sydney. And the media got this footage from the middle of the night as Christophe Alligaert closed in on Michael. Summing up the danger of these races, after that happened, the next morning, Mike Hall was killed in a car accident outside Canberra. He was run over by a drunk driver in the early mornings after reputedly having 5 or 6 days of only 2 hours sleep at night. But his legacy was the event that he'd created, and it's an event that carries on even now, and you can see his records there. At the end of the Indian Pacific Wheel Race, Christophe Alligaert rode to within 500 metres of the finish line, which was the Sydney Opera House, but decided it wasn't appropriate to finish. So posted this photo on social media and then went home. Later on, they organised a tribute at the Opera House, and you can see Alligaert there placing flowers, which was attended by over 2,000 members of the Sydney cycling community. The Transcontinental race continues to the day. On the left is Mike Hall's partner at the time, Anna Hasselhoff. She now organises the event. And on the right is Fiona Kolbinger from Germany, who won the event last year, becoming the first female rider to win an international standard long-distance event. This year's Transcontinental race starts in 2.5 weeks' time from Gerardsbergen in Belgium and goes through these 4 checkpoints to finish at Burgos in Romania. If you're interested, I'm sure that you can look online and see the riders as they follow their routes across Europe, with the winner probably expected to complete a particularly hard course this year in about 8 days' time. Thank you very much for listening.